Thank you for being part of this.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for showing up on Friday night. So you probably been watching this, so I won't go, but this is Women Gets in the Science Fiction Writer, and I love this as an idea, which is the point of it is that if you pay close enough attention, you can see the future in spots. And we're going to talk about that later on, but it's the notion is the future that we all imagine is actually happening. It's just not distributed everywhere, right? So when innovations and entrepreneurship happen, there's a small group of people that are engaged with that and are using the early stage of that thing, but eventually it spreads. So we're going to talk a little bit. There's something though that we're going to do deeper on this. What is really important to me is not only the thing you're building, but how you work. And in fact, those are mutually included. They have to be together. We're going to learn how to spot the future. We're going to do activity to do that. And this is something that is surprising to people. I think innovation is overused and it doesn't really have any meaning. And also, the way we talk about innovation is wrong, I think, for the most part. And I'll tell you why as we go through. The notion is that this gives you a little bit more background of me. You notice that I have a lot of innovation in my titles that I've now struck out. But I worked at the largest media company in the United States, USA Today, Gannett. I ran a nonprofit foundation and supplied about $250 million to nonprofit startups as a journalism and media innovation. And then I'm a fellow at the Learning Innovation Lab at Harvard. And I was the first ever innovator in residence at Harvard Business School and co-founder of Subculture, which you heard. So it gives you a little bit. But I have all that struck through to talk more deeply about what's behind these things. This is the company I worked for 15 years. This is the headquarters in Virginia. The reason I show this is because this was built for about $340 million 12 years ago. And like most newspaper companies, it's not doing very well. So this whole thing, this happens to us today. This was the rest of corporate headquarters of Gannett. The entire operation exists in 1/4 of the space, and they recently sold the property for $340 million. So they spent $340 million on it, and then they sold it 12 years later because they couldn't afford it. So all the time I was there, I was looking at disruption and innovation, and I was shocked that these were really talented, rational people, and they failed to change. So this is where we're going to talk a little bit about why smart people fail to do this. What is it about their brains? What is it about us as Homo sapiens that does that? Why that's important to the topics we're talking about, especially with entrepreneurship. So the basic question is why change is so difficult. Why is it so hard to do? This is an important notion, which is even great breakout companies go through this cycle. And it's hard to see forever, I'm sure. This is Microsoft. And you can see 1986 is when Microsoft started. They really hit it in 95 is where it began to climb. And this is the classic, what we call hockey sticking, right? So it looks like a hockey stick on the way up, small, and then got really big. Peaked, and then has never done quite as well. It's about half the valuation and returns that it makes. So it's still a successful company, but not nearly the growth curve, right? This could be any company. It just happens to be Microsoft. Almost every company goes through this arc. In fact, this is something I've created that I call the universal arc of organizations. So what happens at the beginning is someone comes up with a divergent idea. So I've spotted the future, I think of something really cool. I build an emergent team, so I get people to help me actually prototype and build that thing out. From that point, I go into operational growth. So I'm adding lawyers, I'm adding technicians, I'm adding marketers, IT, accountants. And then when I get there, I sustain and defend that, right? So this is the case where Microsoft won. They were basically a monopoly in the operating systems environment. They sustained and defended. That's what they had to do. They had to beat back all the competitors. Then they got into successful stagnation, which means that you're still having returns, things are still going well, but you're not really changing anything. You're not growing. You're not offering new products. Then there's a moment where there's a desperate decline, and finally demise, right? So something happens, and you can see what happens. There's two vital points. So for you thinking about building a new venture, this is a very dangerous moment between the emergent team and operational growth. It's what the phrase I use for this is collapse into structure. You're really busy building out what you want to see, and you forget to pay attention to culture and things that you're doing, the way that it's working. And so there's a moment where you switch to operations, and that becomes the most important thing. This sets your DNA up for failure later on. So that's really important. And then for successful companies, like Microsoft, during that era of successful stagnation, or automotives, pick your big company here, this is where incumbents fail. So they're okay, they're moving along, everything's working, and then they hit a limit. And we'll talk deeply about that. So one of the ways to think about this is, and we'll get into, is these are the new systems that we see that are already successful. This is what Netflix looks like as an organization. They never collapsed into structure. They kept an operational growth, and they had emergent managers. Netflix is really fascinating to me because it's about 12 years old now. And when they started, it was a disruptor for Blockbuster, which you probably, I don't know if anyone remembers Blockbuster, but that was a video rental company. And so Blockbuster, they disrupted that, and then they had to figure out how do I most efficiently mail DVDs. So that was operational. Then they had to figure out, oh, streaming's happening, so how do we get into streaming? And they did that. Then they're streaming, they couldn't get contracts anymore, so they had to be content producers, right? So they went back and forth between operational expertise and keeping these emergent teams. So the new divergent ideas are really important. So divergencies, you'll hear that a lot, and what that basically means is divergency is a way of thinking outside the box. About 10% of us have it organically, but it can be learned, and we'll talk more about that. And that's escaping the demise, the same idea of creating a new subculture, which we'll get into. So let's talk a little bit about us. We're 200,000 years old. We're older than that if you count primates, so we're about 51 million years old around in terms of our ancestry. But we've been around for 200,000 years. What's interesting about that is if an alien anthropologist visited Earth every 10,000 years, so an anthropologist from some space race comes down and takes a look at us, and they start at 100,000 years of our existence. This is what they found. In the first visit, all across the Earth were less than 10 million Homo sapiens, we're hunter-gatherers, and we use stone tools. That's when they come to the first visit. This is at year 100,000, right? Second visit, third visit, fourth visit. 190,000 years of us behaving like this. So even the 190,000th year of Homo sapiens existing, we're still less than 10 million people, hunter-gatherers using some tools. Then the 10th visit, 7 billion complex societies with high tech. The point of this is to say we're much more wired from this standpoint, right? This is how our brains work, and we'll talk about that, why this is important. So we evolved from these people. Does anyone spot the discrepancy in the words? Tiger, right? So the reason that's important is if you see trees and you see tiger and you don't recognize that, you're dead. And therefore, everyone that didn't recognize it is dead. And we evolved from the people who did recognize it, right? So your brain works like this. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine. That's what makes us, one of the things that makes us really particular as Homo sapiens. It's also why we have language, complex languages, because pattern recognition. Now the issue of that, the important thing to remember on this though, is it also if it's tree, rustle tree, what do you think your brain tells you? What's the safest option if you see trees and something's rustling? Pardon?
Assume tiger.
Assume tiger, right, exactly. It's better off to assume the tiger than not have a tiger. So we're hardwired. Anything shaking around, this is all based when we were prey. Like we were prey for a really long time until we had the Stone Age tools. And that's still hardwired into us. So what that means is ambiguity makes us feel weird. It makes us scared, right? And it's deep in your brain. It's the amygdala in your brain that fires off when this happens. And so we evolved to do tree, tiger, tree. We pretend to wrestle. Now this is the reason, surprisingly. Have you ever, when there's a TV on, you can't help but watch it, right? That's because your brain keeps thinking that's a rustle, right? So if you're sitting around and the TV's flickering and it's on, you can't help but look at it, right? And everyone gets mad at you because you're not paying attention because you're looking at the TV. That's because your brain keeps checking to see if there's something that's going to attack you. And that's what is amazing, is the power of certainty. We like things to be certain. So, does anyone see a tiger in this? No tiger? All right, there's no tiger. So, but what I just did is introduce that fear of ambiguity. Even right now, with your brain, a little stuff happened in your brain that made you a little anxious. You might not feel it, but if I did that to you, your heart rate would go up. You might perspired a little bit more. Very invisible, almost intangible, but measurable. So now this is a thing we're going to do together. I want you to name the following colors, but not the words. Okay, so we'll try one out first.
Blue.
Great. Here we go.
Yellow. Black. Purple. Orange. Red. Green.
Ah. Oops. Harder, right? Last ones were harder. This is a really interesting thing. This is your brain. It's called cognitive control. So I gave you a set of instructions, but you have innate behavior that wanted, it was fine when you could ignore the words. When the words became colors, names of colors, your brain has to focus on taking over those automatic processes. Why that's important is when you're trying to build something new, or you're trying to change culture, or trying to innovate, you have to have cognitive control all the time. You have to exercise that all the time. So you constantly have to, that moment where it was red and yellow and blue, you have to override your instincts on that. Let's get that. So this is a notion that humans have, which is that there's survivor value to conformity. We evolved in groups of 50 to 150 people, and we wanted to conform. The reason there's just 10% of us that immediately have divergent ability is if everyone was divergent, nothing would get done, right? If everyone's going, oh, I'm going to go check this out or whatever, nothing would happen. So you need a mix. The reason it's probably 10%, they think, is that that you need some people to say, I wonder what's over that hill, or I gotta go check out, we gotta find water, something new, right? So someone has to explore. And, but mostly our brains are hardwired to be conformists. And that's what makes divergent thinking very hard. So there's a theory from the 70s that's now gaining traction as we study it, which is there's a comfort of that beliefs keep you from thinking about something. So I'm going to try this with you first. So I want you to give me the last two letters of this word. If I say C-O-F-F. Who said I-N? Now did you have a bad day today? All right, okay. Here's why. So most of the coffee is both of those are right. But what they do is a study that shows that when we think of death, if your belief systems are challenged, instead of saying C-O-F-E-E, people say C-O-F-F-I-N, right? And the reason for that is that when you're presented with challenges against your belief systems, people will tell you that it freaks people out. So challenging beliefs equals disturbing my idea of the world, my identity, and that reminds me that I'm mortal. So I freak out, right? So think about this. Now we know that we're scared of ambiguity inherently. We like certainty, right? And if I try to challenge your beliefs, it makes me remember death. So a big surprise that when you come and say, look at this cool new thing I built, and everyone's like, no, that's not cool. I don't like that, right? All of those things are built into how you need to do ideas. So the good example of that, which is playing out politically, is when you have stories, they actually study this, when you have stories about immigration or contradictions in people's religious beliefs, their association with death increases. They can measure that, right? So anything that challenged existing orthodoxy, people have tons of built-in things to reject that. So when you think about that, and this is why I say innovation, if you just focus on building something, and you're not paying attention to the team or what's going on around you, this is why it fails so much, because we have these cognitive things of what it means to be human that actually keeps us from doing a very good job at innovation. This is a good example of Mickey Mouse, no. This is Walt Disney and his brother Roy, which no one knows Roy Disney, right? You don't go to Roy Disney theme park. But the reason that's important about this is Walt Disney started by making Steamboat Willie, these Mickey Mouse cartoons, and they were shorts in theater. So you used to go to the theater and stay all day. You would go and you'd stay like 4 or 5 hours. So these shorts happened in between it. And he was doing a really good job creatively, but losing tons of money. Roy stepped in, he was really good at operations, and Roy focused on the operations. But Walt realized that no one was going to the movies anymore for as long as a day. You'd spend 4 or 5 hours, used to, and then they were going to just, the way we go to movies now, we just go and see a film and leave. And he knew that the shorts wouldn't have a marketplace, so he knew he had to get into feature films. And Roy advised 100% against it, right? Like, we can't do it, it's too expensive. So he started making a film, and he got about a third of the way through and ran out of money. and he had to go to the movie theater chain holders and say, hey guys, I need cash to finish this film. Here's the film. The film was Snow White. It was the first animated full-length feature. It made approximately almost $1 billion of the year. It was the second most successful film of the year. What's interesting about that, though, is then that funded Walt Disney Studios. So Roy was right on one occasion, saying he had to fix what was going on with shorts, but Walt was always divergently thinking, what's next? I've got to anticipate the next move. So this combination of Walt and Roy is a really good thing to keep in your head. Sometimes it's important to be divergent, and you have to stick to your guns and see the view and see the new path. And other times you have to think operationally, what should we do? So we need to understand how companies breathe. And what I mean by that is a lot of the work I do is help large organizations usually figure out, in startups, figure out how to balance this notion of divergency and convergent behavior. The good thing is divergent thinking can be learned, and we're going to do a little bit of that today. One of the important things at divergency, though, is when we study people who are divergent thinkers, which means out of the box, being able to innovate, those types of things. There's one significant trait that everyone shares, and that was that they've lived significantly in another country. So people who have broad foreign experience, whatever that foreign means to you, creates basically another pathway in your head. So if you move to another country, you have to learn, their customs and how to ask for water and what it means to work there and all those different things. Your brain then builds a system that you can always rely on that makes you divergent. So we know that divergency can be increased because we can see it when people have lives that are well traveled. That happens. So this is also how things can form. So there's a person I work with at MIT who studies people your age and bullies, and he found something really interesting, that he was studying these students long term, and they were bullies, and they moved to another school, and they stopped being bullies. And kids who weren't bullies before would move to another school, and they became bullies. Right? So people were switching roles. So you were bullies and non-bullies. The thing that made the difference is that bullies, the school itself was what was causing the bullies. So on the sports teams at the school, if there was a fight between kids, the coach would say, take it outside. And the bullying school, the coach would say, the coach in the bullying school would say, take it outside. The coach in the non-bullying school would say, not on my team. And what happens is the school, the way people interacted, the peers, the students, everyone else, those little dials turned up conformity and fitting in. So you weren't even thinking about being a bully. You never thought about it. You slowly got pushed to be a bully. So what's important about this is transformation and building new products isn't necessarily about the new thing. You tend to think of innovation and entrepreneurship as additive, but actually it's about stopping these type of old behaviors that we have. So really leadership in this space is accumulation of small actions, things that you do day by day. And this is what we call hallways, small ways, doorways, and pathways. So hallways are the story I tell you and I run into the water cooler or the water fountain or in the library or on the sidewalk. The small ways are the ways you act. Doorways are things you open up and step through, and pathways are ideas of what the directions are. So these ways are important to keep in mind. So I'm talking a lot about this because I think you'll all eventually be leaders, and if you're interested in entrepreneurship, you're going to be in a moment of management. This is really important to keep in mind. And this is basically saying this is old behavior, and as you start doing actions, it cascades up. So you reach these thresholds, just like anything else, it has a hockey stick or S-curve to it, where as soon as you start behaving in new ways and paying attention, it will grow. I'm blocking every time. Sorry. Let's skip this. So let's talk a little bit about disruption. So this is the whole notion of how divergent ideas happen. These images will be terrible on this for some reason. So this is the clipper ship. This is the main way that all trade happen around the world. These clipper ships were really fast. They were made up and down this coast. They're buried in England. And the whole point of Clipper was it was a ship of global trade. So what would you do if the whole point of your ship was to go faster and get goods faster, what would you do to make this faster? Any idea? Early on, you just have sales, right? Add more, right? So they added more sales, right? And they even added more sales. These are actual ships. Crazy, like it got to 7 rig masts, right? Fastest ships that could go anywhere. clean, all those types of things. And then this happens, right? Now, this is a steamship, but before that there was a paddle wheel, and we'll get into that in a second. But these were loud and dirty, and no one liked them. And in fact, when this happened, all the clipper companies said, no, this is not the future. This is not, no one likes this, it's awful. You know, it's not, it's smoky, and it's metal, and you know, it's not as fast, it's slow, half the speed and half the distance of the clipper ship. So no clipper ship company said, I'm joining in on that. But what they missed was the ocean going aspect of it was really bad. And these are rivers and coastal routes. So steamships or paddle wheels in America moved around these routes. They went up and down rivers. Now why it's important is because this wasn't carrying goods, it was carrying people. The clipper ships were built to carry goods. The paddle wheels were invented to carry people. What was important for people wasn't the fact that it was fast. They needed to know what time things were happening. So on sailboats, you have to depend on the weather. The clipper ship, they could say we're leaving at 9, we'll get there at 10, and so all of a sudden people started piling on until the fact that you have the Irish potato famine, and the ships are going, and all of a sudden massive amount of people are leaving Ireland, and it's a perfect storm for this disruption to happen. Not one of the clipper ship companies survived this. So all the clipper ships saw that new ship, none of them, no clipper company, all of them went out of business. Not one of them invested in new technology. So this was a disruptive moment. So this is an opportunity to see what was going on, and everyone misses it. And this is where the first part of that, understanding divergency and conformity, no one in the clipper ship company said, oh my God, we should really be paying attention to this. So we can also see this with beer. So this is hard for some of the back end. Now 1890, there's 2011 breweries in the United States. Then Prohibition hits, right? And that number drops from, it was already going down, and then after Prohibition there's 703, and then it dwindled to just 89 in the 80s. Now there's more breweries than there have been in over 125 years today. The shift of that happened was that Colorado, Washington, and Oregon all passed laws that made home brewing legal. Up until then, home brewing was not legal anywhere. So people were, people who had hobbies in homebrew were doing it illegally if they were doing it at all. But then it became legal in those states. What happened is slowly but surely they disrupted this entire marketing ecosystem. So Budweiser, all the big beer agencies we know now were disrupted by home brewers, and they perfected their craft. They kept working at home and doing it, and so this was another disruption. And now you see the big three companies going crazy buying all kinds of craft beer companies because they can't keep up with the demand of craft beer that's happening. So those are 2 moments of disruption. Those are the things that we're looking for. So what we're going to move into now is talking about human-centered design. Is everyone still with me? I know it's Friday. Tired? Good? Happy? Any questions so far? All right. Here we go. So this is what we're going to look for when we're building new things, is that in the left, this is existing offerings and new offerings. This is existing users and new users. If you have existing users and existing offerings, that's a core thing. And you can innovate there, right? That's like adding buttons on the remote control, right? You can slowly add and make innovation. Not going to really do much for you. There's 2 places to be evolutionary, which is I have the same existing customers, and I'm going to build a new product for them, or a new offering for them. That's evolutionary. Or there's existing offers, and I find new users. So I'm using the same tools I've had before, but I'm getting new users. The real thing that's more important, the breakout hits, the things you want to build are actually in this top right-hand corner, which are new offerings with new users, right? That's where you really get exciting growth. So let's talk a little bit about this. The future is impossible to predict, but it's really relatively easy to spot. So that means I can't tell you that the stock market is going to be X or this thing's going to be huge. Virtual reality is a good example. But it's easy to spot what the impact of it could be. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So this is landing on the moon, which is a marquee event, but at the same time that year, the first ATM opened, right? So this is in the late 60s. And it looked like this. This is in England, but this is the vintage automatic teller machine. Now, what's important about this, it's crazy, is they had a card for it, but when you put the card in, it couldn't be spat back out. They mailed you the card after 3 days, right? So you put it in, they took the card, and 3 days later you got it back in the mail. Also, you could only get $25 out at a time, right? And that was it. That was the machine. And almost all the banks said, this is novelty. No one's going to use this. We have tellers. You have all these people that come in. But what you saw in that moment, if you're paying attention, right, is it changed with the ATM. It's changed all the ways we think about money. I don't have to go to a physical bank, right? I can go to this machine. I don't have to talk to people. There's a system in there somewhere that's telling me how much money I have, so it allows me to get it out, right? So even though they couldn't figure out the technology to spit the card back out yet, but it also is telling you is that if you're paying attention to this, you can see that something could really unfold. This is really changing things. So you couldn't predict the way that high frequency trading is happening with lasers now, but you could see how the ATM, so you couldn't predict that we were going to have these robots trading all the stock market, but you could understand how the ATM would shift things. So one of the ways to do that is to think in scenario. What that means is let's sit in a room like this and get together and say, what does it mean not to talk to a teller? What shifts when someone can get cash all the time? How is it connected to their accounts? Will anyone trust that face this machine with their life savings? Now we don't even interact with the machine, right? It's just sitting in, you have Venmo and all those things that are happening. And both things, you can watch how people use the machine, talk to the people who first signed up for the service, understand their motivations, interview the people who work at the bank and what they think it means, find people who have banked there for over 20 years or just open an account and listen to their stories, right? So 2 ways, scenario, which is brainstorming, and observing context, which is human-centered design, which we're going to do tonight. So what's important about that, though, is you're really building this off of understanding the context of which people live. And that's what the observing contexts are. So let's do it right now. Can everyone see what this is? What is that? Yeah, smoke alarm. Tell me all the things you hate about a smoke alarm.
Oversensitivity.
Sound, sensitivity. Why about oversensitivity? When does that happen?
When you're just cooking something,
Right.
It starts beeping.
Yeah, you burn the bacon and it goes crazy, right? What else? The light, yeah, always blinking, right?
Like, you have to like it's on the ceiling.
That's right, yes, hard to get to, yeah. Pardon? Hear one more?
It doesn't stop until like quite a while.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's on the ceiling and it goes off and you just have to let this on, right? So the crazy thing about this is this thing's been around since the 70s, right? In 5 seconds, just by telling stories, we already thought of ways to improve this, right? That was pretty easy. Everyone's had an experience with a smoke alarm that you hate. There's a company named Honeywell that manufactures most of these. It's a 115-year-old company. I think it has 100,000 employees around the world. And they sell these, they're the largest seller of these, and they make them for about $19, $20, right? But someone took all this idea and put it together, right? So this is Nest. This is started by 2 former Apple engineers. And Nest is $125, right? So it's 110 more, about $100. It's gone down a little bit. But what Nest, does anyone have a Nest in their house? Not yet. So Nest sits on the wall, right? It doesn't have any lights on it. It glows soft blue when people walk by if you want it to, you don't have to. It changes to orange when the battery goes down. No one said that, but you know when the battery goes out, it just goes on, right? That doesn't happen with this. When there's smoke, it says, I'm sensing smoke. It says it. It has a voice that says, I'm sensing smoke. And it says it 3 times, and then it fires off the alarm. To shut it off, you step in front of it and wave your hand like this 3 times, and it resets, right? So they sold this, now I'm going to forget what it is, roughly $1 billion to Google, right? And they did it in 2 years, right? This is a 2-year product. Honeywell, Honeywell CEO said, no one in our company would think that anyone would spend $125 on a smoke alarm, right? But they would if they just listened to everybody and could tell them everything that was frustrating with that, right? So that is a perfect example of how you can take just a little bit of information, and we could have designed this, right? It was all, that was something all of us in this group could have done. So one of the ways that we'll start, and you'll hear this with the IDEO speaker in a couple weeks, I think, which is the power of how might we. We use how might we in design thinking very specifically to say, what's the possibility? What's the potential, right? So these are just a couple of examples. How can we raise our customers' average monthly 10% monthly spend? How can we minimize our customer call times? How might we reward our loyal customers? These are all kind of classic things to do. So how might we help busy families with their day? These are all powerful ways to start. So when you want to find a problem, you want to identify a problem and create a design challenge and use this time management statement. So this is basically a small graph of human-centered innovation, which I'll read just in case you can't see in the back, which is you start with an inform phase, which is you uncover a need, you observe that, and then you storytell. We come back, so we go out in the field, and we're like anthropologists. We go talk to people, we understand what's going on with their lives, and then we come back and tell our team what that is. Then you synthesize that, you brainstorm off of it, you assess what you brainstormed, you prototype, experiment, review, then build, define, scale. So it goes inform, inspire, iterate, implement. Right? That's the basic things. Why I'm talking about this is last year there's about 325 million startups, $325 million spent on startups in 2015. Sorry, 2015. Anyone guess what the fail rate of that? How many of those fail? Somebody got it? 60? 80? 90? 94%. So $325 million spent last year. Most of those didn't make it, right? Now, if you use this technique, the fail rate goes down to around 70%, which doesn't sound, it's still, 3 out of 4 failing, but it's a way better than 1 out of 12 failing, right? So that's why this is really powerful. If you do this, what we know about when you create something new, it takes about 4 versions of it to stabilize. If you spend all your money on the first version, all your time on the first version, and it doesn't work, you don't have any room. This, by the time you build a prototype, gives you your first version cheaply, right? So this is always a better way to approach. Oops. So what we're going to do is everyone have Post-it notes and markers. If you raise your hand if you need some. You don't need all the Post-it notes, just a few. Now, and also, so all you need to do innovation really is Post-it notes and Sharpies. And then I'll teach you something, which is when you pull off a Post-it note, instead of pulling it up like this, which curls it, it doesn't stick. If you pull it side to side, it sticks. So if nothing else tonight, you learn how to pull off a Post-it note. It's funny because I told this chief innovation officer at 3M who makes Post-it notes, and he's like, no one in our organization knows that. So this is me dealing with Post-it notes. So when you pull them off, we're going to use these in a second. Sound. Oh man, do you think this will have sound? Do you get the remote to this, just in case we need to turn it up? So what we're going to do is, so I did a huge amount of travel work for USA Today around a new travel product, and we went on interviews. So you go in interviews in the space. Oh, it might be on the side, right? Yeah. Sorry. So when you go on these interviews, what you're doing is you're looking for this very distributed amount of people who have very different lifestyles. And so we're gonna listen to her. This is someone interviewing her, and this is around travel and how she plans it. So I want you to take down things that you think are important about what she's saying, right? So capture key moments of what it's like to travel. So you're basically an anthropologist listening to her story to understand what her needs are around travel.
I look in books and I look in maps and I look at all sorts of things. And so, I sort of figure out like what's the most unusual place that I want to go to, and then I will do the research, whether or not it's like even something that is like a trip that, I don't do just like leisure kind of travel. I like to do more adventure style, like culture, culture seeking type travel. So even if it turns out that it's not a place I want to go, I still want to go. Because it's it's different. It's another place in the world. I can tick it off my map Yeah. So Sri Lanka, I don't know much about. I know someone from Sri Lanka, and she's fantastic. She's my own boss. So just knowing her and knowing a little bit about her and her family makes me want to go there. And Mongolia, I mean, the food I'm sure would be amazing, and I know a lot about China. So I think going a little bit farther north, I think would be very interesting.
So, why adventure travel? Kind of why do you?
Well, I think it sort of stems from my trip to Peace. I was in Peace Corps,
Yeah.
and my first trip overseas was to Lesotho, which is the little country within South Africa.
Okay.
And from there, I lived there for 2 years, and you just sort of learn how to travel, by living there. So, I was really young. I was 24 when I went, and then I just got the bug. I traveled all over Africa, went all the way up through like the northeast coast, and then on my way home, I backpacked my way up through Africa, and then in through Europe, and then on the way home, and that was just amazing.
Yeah.
So after that, it was just, I just made the decision that, like, a vacation to me is more about, learning something new and really getting out of, like, this space. It's 180 degrees different than, how I exist now. And I think that that's what a true vacation is. You're taking your mind someplace completely different. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge to get around, using the local transportation, and, it's a new language, and you're just trying to learn, as you go. And when you're immersed like that, that's when, I think, you really get to know the country. So
Why is that important to kind of immerse yourself in the country and find something new, something challenging?
Well, I think, for me, I just want to get to know people. Different types of people. So, in different ways of life and different ways of living. So it's one of those things, like, deep in my soul, like, I just need to do it. So, I try to go to 2 places internationally a year, and then I do a lot of travel within the States. But 2 big trips a year. I'm trying to stay to that.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah, sure.
I went to Ireland in April, and I got caught in the volcano ash thing, and I had to stay an extra week, so that blew an extra week on my vacation. I'm like, damn it.
Wow.
Yeah, because I really wanted.
So one of the things that's important to capture on this, and we're going to go around and you can raise your hand where the post-it is, there's a couple things in this that we're looking for. We want insights around travel. We don't necessarily need specifics, right? So the things, if you captured stuff around, places like Sri Lanka or China, that's fine. But what we're really looking for is revelatory types of things that explain how travel works for her and what her belief in travel is. All right. So, anyone want to volunteer one in the back? Go ahead. And say which one that. Tell me what you said as you raised it up.
She found it easier to navigate Sri Lanka when she was with the locals, so that she
Yeah. Okay, there's a little bit more on that. So, found it easier to travel Sri Lanka. She actually wasn't with someone, but you're right. Does anyone remember what she said about Sri Lanka? How did she decide to go to Sri Lanka?
Stories from her
Boss, right? So that's one thing to think about, is that basically personal connections drove decision makings on it, right? What else? What else does anyone have? Go ahead.
Travel wasn't just for leisure for her, but about, like, learning more and being challenged.
That's right. And where did that style come from? Why did she like to be challenged?
People.
Yeah.
She said she challenges, which she was all about people.
Right. Good. What else about?
She also said she had a background in the Peace Corps.
That's right. The Peace Corps drove it. Like, she had an experience in the Peace Corps, and then she had that. So you have that captured?
Just took like a bunch.
Okay, that's okay. So basically, go ahead.
She claimed it was a bug, right?
Yes.
So she experienced it once, and it continued to fester within.
Yeah, that's right. So it's something that she had, and when they asked about that, what did she say? It was interesting.
It's different from now. It's a challenge because it's taking you outside of this
Yeah, so she led the challenge of being outside of her space, right? That was really important to her. And also she said something really interesting about that, which was, what did it do to her personally?
It took her mind off of like her own life, so it made it even more of a vacation.
That's right.
That's
Of the challenge, right? That's right. And also she said something very specifically, she's like, it's in my soul, right? She was very heartfelt about how important travel was for her. And what happened when she didn't get to go? What happened when the volcano happened, right at the end? Yeah, and she was really upset about that because she couldn't go to a different place, right? So, what else did you hear? Anybody else? Go ahead.
She lived in a different place and then had to travel by living there, she said?
Yes, that's that's the Peace Corps, so that informed her travel for the rest of her life. Go ahead.
She finds it important to immerse herself in the culture and meet people from whatever country she's in.
Yeah, that is a very key insight for her. So we have a couple things from this person who's a very specific. This woman backpacks through, very rugged places in the world that she doesn't know. She likes immersion. She likes challenge, right? It makes her feel better that she gets to do that. That's a very specific viewpoint on travel that we can learn from. And there's one. Go ahead.
She spoke about how she didn't want to go to China, but she wanted to go to Mongolia because she didn't want to do what a lot of people are doing.
Yeah.
She wanted to find out something new.
She wanted an orthodox travel, right? So we're going to listen to one more. Now that you kind of know what we're hunting for, we're going to do one more. So instead of, you can take lots of notes or also just pick up key pieces. When you listen to this one too, notice what happens with the interviewer, okay? And this we'll just do for a couple minutes so you can get another flavor for it.
It sounds like you don't get any person who's involved in the booking process.
No, my girlfriend and I, we traveled together, two of us, so
Yeah.
she was heavily involved in the research process, but I think I could probably speak for both of us in saying this is kind of how we did it.
How did that kind of break down? Did you take different roles in the process?
Yeah, a little bit. We both looked at flights independently because she's actually here in the States while I was in Sweden, so we weren't like working side by side to book this trip.
Yeah.
But we were like researching it independently and emailing each other about what we're gonna do. And
Yeah.
I actually ended up researching and getting our flights. She ended up then doing most of the research and booking our lodging.
Nice.
And then we kind of figured out what we were going to do together in the weeks kind of just leading up to our trip and while we were there.
Right.
So that's kind of how it broke down.
How did that work when you're doing that part together?
This part?
Yeah.
We looked, kind of like I said before, and we used travel books, we used the internet, and then we spoke to people who had, maybe friends who had studied abroad or family members who had traveled there before.
Yeah.
And just kind of said, we may have even made a list, I think, of things we wanted to do for sure. And then we just sort of like mapped out our days leading up to Paris. We sort of mapped out our days there, but
Yeah.
we changed plans sometimes during, maybe we're tired this afternoon, we just want to go crash and watch a movie or something and then move things. So we sort of had a general outline of things we wanted to do, but we didn't necessarily have to stick to it.
Yeah. So when you were...
So what did we hear there? What was the first thing that was different about him? Yeah.
He wasn't planning a vacation for just himself, he was planning a vacation.
That's right. And did that make it easier or harder to plan the vacation?
Probably harder.
Yeah. He had a lot of stuff, like we went back and forth, she was in Sweden, they were apart, right? They had to do a lot of things. So yeah, traveling for two. What else?
It was different in the sense that we as people watching the video didn't know where he was talking about, and he, even amongst like the one place he was talking about, it was one place, as opposed to like the previous woman who had a lot to say about a lot of different
Places, right? Go ahead.
He's also not traveling to like check it off his map, for example. he's doing this as a one-time thing, and he's going and he has a like flexible schedule where he can go back and like take a nap and not necessarily be there to explore.
That's right. So a different experience. Like the last person was all immersion challenge. They have a list of things to do, right? And so we'll get there when we end, but they might just crash on the couch. Very different than the person backpacking across, rural Africa, right? Very different experiences. Although there was one thing they had in common about trying to decide stuff. Did anyone pick that up?
Books and
The research process, yes, but there's a specific thing about that, about how they learned.
other people.
That's right. So remember the thing with last time with Sri Lanka, right? So these are very different people, but what did we find in common with them already? People, right? Personal recognition that they have. So right there, that's what's called a compensating behavior. So we're looking for two things when we do this process: unmet needs and compensating behaviors. And unmet needs are things you're frustrated by, or compensating behaviors are way that humans have already figured out a way to solve it. So we can build stuff from that, right? So what we have right here already is like, people really want personal recommendations. Now, this is old, it's almost 8 years old now, so there is something that does that. What is that? TripAdvisor, right? That came from this idea. They ran into that. They found that in the research, what was missing. How can we do this? Now, it's not friends, right? And there's some problems with it. There's still opportunity in the travel space on that. What else? Is there anything else they capture on that?
On the same note as like talk to people, he didn't go through any of what people consider proper channels. He didn't talk to a travel agent. He didn't talk to like local experts.
Right.
He used blogs. He used the internet. So, and this is 8 years ago. That would have been a time when going through travel agents was still not the time.
That's right. Yeah, that's perfect. So what you found very early on, because of the internet, neither one of these people who travel extensively are using travel agents. So if I saw this, would I be excited about investing in travel agencies? Right? Like, you want to get out of that. That's spotting the future. We're talking to people traveling internationally who aren't using travel agents. Right? So that is not something that people feel they need to do. They can do all their own research. So those are key things. So what came out of this, there's a lot of stuff, but I'll show you, which is going to be hard to see, is that there's a thing that happens when people travel that came out of this research, which is there's people who want to move travel efficiently. So I'm a business person, and I go to the same hotel because I like the gym. I go to the same PF chains, everywhere I go, where I can get that's the same. And then people who are transformed by the travel process. And efficient, and there's a checkoff area, which is what I call postcarding. So you go to, Eiffel Tower, Colosseum, you hit all the big points of where you're traveling, and you're checking that off. And then, and this is actually really interesting, because if you went to Paris and you came back and people said, "How's the Eiffel Tower?" and you said, "I didn't see it," people think you're weird, right? So you have to do this weird checkoff thing. Everyone has to do that at some point, because you got to be culturally, you got to answer those questions. But this is the big moment. Here we actually have this term here, which is immersive, which is the type of travel that she was really into. So this is an interesting thing where we started building from was this immersive experience. People had a hard time getting in an immersive thing. At the end of it was people who inhabit those spaces. It's like, I not only go to Paris, I don't want anyone to know I'm a tourist. I wear a beret. I walk around with a baguette. I try to be as brief as possible. But the immersion part is where there's an opportunity that wasn't met. So just to finish up real quick, this is why we talked about all this stuff tonight, which is when you're really building out breakthrough innovation, bringing back innovation into the conversation, you want to spot a disruption, you want to understand the disruption that's happening and see it. That's spotting the future. Divergent thinking outside the box, building new ideas. And then empathy, which empathy is understanding these people's lives. So you go into their context, you understand who they are, and that leads to breakthrough innovation. That doesn't mean you're going to be successful. It just means you're building something that has a higher degree of potential for success. Because then the next part is you have an innovation, but you have to have delight and utility in that to make that work. And that is a super hit. So the iPhone is both delightful to use, right? But it also is it's still a phone. I can surf the internet on it. It has high utility. And you can see this across, especially with websites, where Craigslist, which is not delightful to use by any means, but it's super high utility, right? And so the design worked for that. Or something that's really delightful, people will spend money on too. Candy Crush, right? Just what the heck, as an example. But the notion is if you hit all three of these, then you're doing something. You're going to have a hit. You're going to have a new thing that really people want.
Now, what if the utility is pretty much unprecedented and unforeseen? So let's take the internet, for example, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure people were using books pretty heavily. People were doing what they wanted pretty heavily in their life. How did they end up developing the internet as something that would be of utility as well as the life?
Yeah, so at first it was utility. When the internet first started, it was a way for people to move packets of information. And you know the history of the internet? It's like military. There's a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then at first it's super utility, right? You can have a whole, these will work too. If you do breakthrough innovation with utility, that could be, you can win. And you can win with the light. But if you do both of them, you're more assured of a bigger breakthrough. But yeah, you can go up, you can start with utility and make everything better. Like, go on and on. Like TV at the very beginning, when TVs were first invented, was just the light because it was like a magic box, right? And then the utility started happening more and more. So at first it was just the light of seeing it, and then the utility came in afterwards, and we started using screens for all kinds of things. Any other questions on anything? Go ahead.
Is there a lot of companies and businesses now that copy a lot of the other businesses and make it better?
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a lot of innovation because they're focusing more on the design.
Yeah, it's not. Those are what's called fast followers, right? And you see that a lot in Asia, where that used to be. Although that's changing now. So, for example, there's cities in China that all they did was have all these manufacturing facilities for iPhones and cell phones. But now those people are getting together and building their own products, and they're making these phones. They're making 150,000 of a phone just to try out what it works, and they keep doing that about every 3 or 4 months. Slowly but surely, they're getting better and better at this. So they're moving from fast followers to this, and you saw that a lot. Post-war Asia had a lot of those things going on. And it wasn't like Sony had the transistor radio. There were some things that happened like that, but increasingly, they were really good at manufacturing, and now they're getting better and better at design. So you'll start to see a phone that rivals the iPhone from China or India. Like that, I think that will start happening. Any other questions? Thoughts? Interesting? Understandable? Any other points? Questions? You all are human-centered design experts? All right, that's good. One thing I didn't mention on that, but you saw is when you do the process, you really want to be where the person's at, right? So each person we asked where they did the travel planning, that woman did it on a computer in her bedroom. He did it at the kitchen table where he was sitting. And you want to do that because it makes people familiar and remember things. People will tell you all kinds of crazy stuff. You're like an intimate stranger with them when you do these. I always tell the story. I was in Arizona doing research and was with a couple, and they were flipping houses. So they'd buy a house and they'd sell it, and then the market crashed, and they had 3 houses and were underwater. And I said, well, how do you go to dig yourself out? And they said, well, we're getting a divorce and filing for bankruptcy. But no one knows that. Our kids don't know that yet. But they told me who they had met 15 minutes ago, right? So people will tell you all kinds of things in the process. But you want to make sure you're getting people who are very different, right? So we found someone who wants immersive travel, who does, very intense travel, someone who's very lightly traveled. We talked to someone who'd never been out of the country before and planning a trip. And the anxiety of that person was huge. They saved all their lives to go to Italy. And then this volcano happened. Remember that volcano in Iceland, and you couldn't fly through. It would destroy jet engines. So she was terrified that she wasn't going to be able to go on her trip. So those are all kinds of things. So you want a very different group of people. You only have to talk to 12 to 14 people, though. That's what's really interesting about the technique. If you get the right diverse group of people, then you're going to have a really good moment. Yeah?
What I've noticed with a lot of startup clubs around here is that you have this amazing idea and people get behind it at first, and then you get further in depth with the process and people kind of like drop out and lose interest. How, when you're starting an initiative or a business, do you make sure that interest remains?
Yeah, so that's that chart that we saw, right? The emergent team that you first get is really excited about it. But I think the thing is it's hard work that this stage of the anyway, I can build it back. This moment here, everyone's kind of on board, and then you start, this prototype experiment review process is a little maddening. So some people, if you're working on a team, you want what I call the 2 pizza rule for the team, or it's really Jeff Bezos that invented it. Never get a team bigger than you can feed with 2 pizzas, right? So you want 4 to 6 people, and you want a diverse amount of talent on this. So you want someone who's really excited about this. You might have someone at the beginning who's really excited about talking to people, and that's great, that's part of the process. But find people who are really excited about building and trying stuff out, so as it grows, you can kind of bring them more in the mix. So if you start with just tons of people at the beginning that are really good at this, they'll fade out. So keeping interest in, also having people feel like they're making an impact. The number one thing that people want at work and when they're working on things is a sense of progress. So if you're just churning, right here, or your wheels are spinning, people are going to get disillusioned and leave. So the number one thing you do is, how are we moving this forward in some way? And that's universal. It's called the progress principle. There's a whole book on it around how people in organizations want to have a sense that they can move forward. Yeah.
So you're talking about like the fast forward. So I was wondering, like, what if you're the one that is like being called in and you don't want to be like outcompeted by the people who like are following you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question, and that's kind of what's happening in the entire economy, right? So that's the world you live in, which is why this stuff is more important than ever. So you have to have a robust moment where you're always making something new, and if you're just operationalizing, right? If you at the beginning when you saw this, I'll use this one, right? This moment, if you just sit here and all you're doing is creating the sustain and defend, it's impossible to maintain that anymore. So car manufacturers, for example, in the U.S. Had 60 years of sustaining and defending. There's 3 of them. Every car brand that you know of is actually if you say like Lincoln or some of those old car names, there were actually other car companies that the others absorbed. So there's 37 car companies in Detroit at one time. Now it's just 3. And they had a 60-year run. And what disrupted them? Well, now Tesla, but before that. Fine. Japanese, yeah, the Japanese cars figure out a way to make cars more efficiently and cheaper, right? And they had a whole different system. That disrupted them the first time, and then Tesla is disrupting them now. So you have 2 moments, which is why, anyone see what Ford was saying? That's what they announced 2 weeks ago? They're going to be a mobility company. They might not even manufacture cars eventually. So they're manufacturing cars that you could call. They're basically competing with the Uber. So they're not going to build, their idea is we're not going to build cars for people, although we'll have that, but eventually we're just going to build robot cars. And we're all just about moving people place to place. So they are getting back to their divergent roots in that moment, or here rather. Yeah?
I think for a lot of people, the idea and need for duplicate products or copycats that cheaper isn't necessarily better. So how do you sort of fight the signal that the product can be cheap but also high quality and especially compared to?
Yeah, so that's a classic innovator's dilemma, if you know that work at all. If you're interested in this, it's Innovator's Dilemma. It's by Clay Christensen. But what happens, to your point, is, this is also why I use Post-its, see I can move them around. It's pretty exciting, isn't it? What happens in that is that you have a product that, it's hard to see, but that goes up. And so let's take a TV remote, right? The TV remote had 4 buttons on it, 5, on, off, volume, right? They had a switch. And then slowly but surely, your button, like, look at the remotes now. They're crazy, right? A TV remote, like a cable remote, will have like, I think 45 buttons on it, right? Really expensive. What happens is, as you move up this chain, you're making it more and more complex, right? So this thing goes up, and you're selling more and more to the same people. What happens to disruptors, what happens to get disruptors, down here there's non-consumers, people who aren't using that product at all. And they make something simpler and cheaper, and the non-consumers start using it, and eventually this will go and overtake that, right? So disruption almost always happens with people who aren't using the product. Think back, that's why I use the ship example. The problem with the ships is, when you think about this, is that they were in the sailing business, right? They were in sailing, but they weren't in people moving businesses. So the nobody was buying tickets to go on a clipper ship, or very few. In the early steamships, they were moving people around. So the thing is that the people who were using their ships were not consuming clipper ships. They were not using the shipping. Clipper ships were built on shipping, not moving people around. And so at first, it was people who had nothing to do with that business, which is why the clipper ship people couldn't see it. That's not what they did. They moved cargo. Those ships were not built for people. And they thought that no one was really going to use these. And so that's how you can see. That's another way to spot the future. So it can be cheap and effective. And usually, though, what you want to do is not target this consumer up here. It's hard to get in that. But target people who aren't using it. And they don't care about how cheap it is. They believe in the value of it because they can see it easier. So that's where we want to focus on that as a thing. And eventually, you can drive up and take over the big, whoever is in the space already. Anybody else?
You talk about empathy as you are building an idea and starting to get feedback. Where's best to turn? Is it truly anybody who's a potential user or has been touched by something? Or
Yeah, so you want to go into this space. So if you're building something, if you have an idea, right, what you want to do is, I'll give you an example. I went into Indianapolis to study people who were, what information needs for shopping, right? So we knew that we wanted to build something around shopping. So we had that at least. And their design challenge was how might we improve decision-making processes using information for people making purchasing decisions, something like that. So we talked to someone who shops with coupons, massive coupon person, someone who only buys luxury brands, someone who only shops on the internet, someone who every other day went to Target and looked at the end caps to see what was on sale at clearance spots in Target. Very different people, but all about shopping, right? So you define the category and then you set up that diversity of experiences that people have. And so that's what you want to aim for on that. So you don't want to talk to the same people over and over again, right? It's very different from like quantitative studies where like I'm talking to 4, 40-year-old moms with 2 kids. That doesn't work. What you have to do is, a working mother, a stay-at-home mother, someone who, has non-traditional roles, like all those different things you want to capture.
On a practical level, I'm sure it's easier in a big company or a company that has resources or connections, but how would a small company or a small startup talk to so many different types of people? Like, how does it get those people to come in?
Yeah, so it's easy. Craigslist works really well. So you put it out and say, I'm looking for this type of person. And you pay them, by the way. You don't do this for free. You pay the people. Now, the crazy thing about this is not expensive. You can pay people $50 to $100 an hour, which is relatively really cheap when you're talking about building a new product. You can certainly get, if you're building something for students, they'll probably just do it, if you're building something here. So you do that and you advertise. You want to define the characteristics that you're looking for first. And then when you're doing that process, so it's easy to put that out on Craigslist and have people respond to it. And that's the best way. Or use friends and family. They just can't be directly related to you or what's going on. So you want a little distance. But and what I was saying is, it's cheap to do this. It's just time and space. So this process, if you do it right, is a 6 to 10 week process, depending on what happened. So you're interviewing people, you come back, you storytell, you give everyone the information, and then you start brainstorming and synthesizing. You'll probably hit that at a couple more speakers. So that latter half of it, I'm not going to spend any time on today, but you'll hear more about that in the speaker series. But so it's cheap to do in a sense. The problem is this, though. This same thing that we have here. Sorry, my nose is. I'm about to have an allergy attack. This moment of when you're here in this organization, when it's big, and you go and say, "I want to go do this thing," the leadership has a really hard time absorbing that. So the reason you don't hear about this everywhere is, one, people have huge egos. Ego is the enemy of innovation. It's one of my key phrases. But also, they don't spend the time on it, right? So it doesn't cost a lot, but it does take time, and that's where you see organizations reject the approach. Yeah.
In terms of innovation, does it kind of depend on market prices? Like for oil, if oil prices spike, how long will it take for innovation to try to fill the gap? So, because if more oil spikes, more people would probably buy hybrids or.
Yeah. So that's the notion of delight. So Tesla isn't really doing well because the gas is expensive. In fact, we have cheaper gas than we've had in 15 years. but they're still doing really well because it's a delightful thing. And really, when you talk to Tesla, they'll tell you, I was at Tesla 4 weeks ago, and they'll tell you that most of their purchasing decisions isn't about environmental. No one really cares. I mean, there's a small group that does, but for the most part, they love the car. Like, they think the car is exciting. And they know that. They knew that the market was very small for people who were concerned about gas consumption, but very high with people who wanted something delightful. And they believe it's important for the environment, but they don't use that as a sales. They push the car, not the impact of the car. And that's a really important distinction, is they understand that. Now, the other thing that was funny is they have a whole network. You can drive Tesla across the country, and they put these power stations up. How many people who have Teslas use the power stations as opposed to plugging it in? Do you have any idea? Yes. Pardon? What'd you say? Yeah, it's less than 10%. The reason they built those power stations across the country, they don't even know if anyone's done that yet. But the reason they built it is people told them when they were building the car that the reason they weren't doing it is they were scared. What if I want to drive across the country? How do I do it? No one actually drives across the country anymore. But that thing, it was a mental block that kept people from that. So they listened to their consumers. They did this stuff and realized that we had to build that system so they could say, you can drive across country. Even though no one actually does, they want the idea of it to exist. And they were afraid of the car without having it. So it was a really important moment in Tesla. Good.
So,
all right.
Michael, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
This was a great introduction to our series, and we're really excited to have a keener sense of what design thinking is all about, of disruption, et cetera, and we're thrilled that you could be with us and help us get started. So, thank you very much.
Thanks for hanging in there.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all of you for being part of this. We will reconvene in 1 week at 7 p.m. next Friday night. We'll build on some of what we've heard tonight and think about what it means to iterate and prototype and to build along those lines as well. I would heavily encourage you on your way out. Well, first, if you have any questions,
yes, I'm gonna hang out.
Michael's willing to hang around for a little bit, but also make sure to grab some dessert because we've got a lot here. So, in any case, thank you very, very much. We look forward to seeing you next week as well. Thank you.